Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story is the best account regarding the story of Jeffrey Dahmer that I've ever seen. I watched it when it first came out, and I should have done this last week, but due to being sick and being hit by Hurricane Ian, I wasn't able to. But yeah, outside of documentaries, which are way better because they're historically accurate and give a much better description and insight as to the gruesomeness and like the horrific details of Jeffrey Dahmer's like killing spree. So if you want historical accuracy, watch a documentary. But as far as like films and movies and stuff, which always change details around for dramatic purposes and whatnot, as far as that goes, this is the best account regarding the story of Jeffrey Dahmer that I have ever seen. And I saw the movie with Jeremy Renner, and don't get me wrong, I like Jeremy Renner, he's a great actor, but that movie was putting me to sleep. But the difference between that and this show is that movie is told from the killer's perspective, whereas this show, even though it does focus a lot on Jeffrey Dahmer because it is his story, it also focuses on the perspective of the victims and their families, which at the same time makes it a lot more horrifying. So credit where credit is due. I think Ryan Murphy did a fantastic job in writing the show and putting it together. Evan Peters, spot on performance becoming Jeffrey Dahmer. I've seen him, not Evan Peters, Jeffrey Dahmer. I've seen him talk in interviews, and I've seen him like walking into court and his demeanor and everything. Evan Peters did his very best to become that guy. So fantastic performance by him. Hopefully he wins an Emmy. And Richard Jenkins as Lionel Dahmer and Niecy Nash as Glenda Cleveland. Like everybody involved, like they all did a really fantastic job. And what I really like about this show too is the subtle details they kind of throw in there and the visual storytelling, like the way Jeffrey will kind of be walking by and you can kind of see on the side there that they have missing persons posters. So they don't outright tell you what's going on, but you can kind of see it for yourself with visual storytelling. So the way they put this show together was just amazing. And what I really love about this series is how it points out how someone like Jeffrey Dahmer was even able to exist, because he should have been caught many times, and the reason he wasn't was primarily due to police negligence. Now, I've seen some theories on here saying that Jeffrey Dahmer got away with it because of white privilege, or because he lived in a neighborhood, he chose a neighborhood where he knew that he could just get away with it. When in reality, it's a lot of things. It's not just one thing. And I think the series does an okay job at showing that. I don't think people understand that you can't prove that Jeffrey Dahmer killed anybody because you saw Jeffrey Dahmer walk out with someone and then they turned up missing. Like anything could have happened in that time. Anybody could have killed that person. Anybody could have kidnapped that person. That doesn't prove that he's a murderer. Just because he went to jail because he was molesting a kid, that doesn't prove that he's a murderer. Like you need something to connect him to that.
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
It could also be just poor police training, and that they don't see, hey, maybe I should probably investigate this, or like question him a little bit further, like, or whatever. It could just be that. It could just be that they don't see the poor as important. It could be racism, and a lot of it could be homophobia, which they showed in the show. I cannot remember what episode it was, but it was the same episode where Jeffrey Dahmer kills that 14-year-old kid and says that he's 19 years old. The police clearly were homophobic, and I think they made homophobic remarks which were brought up later in another episode, but that could be a very big reason, that because they were poor, they were black, and they were gay, they didn't see them as meaningful. So it's a multitude of reasons. But regardless, it was police negligence that allowed Jeffrey Dahmer to get away with it for so long. And I think the episode that perfectly depicted this was, I think, Cassandra, the one that primarily focused on Glenda Cleveland, who wasn't really Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor. I think she lived in the building next to him, but she wasn't like in the adjacent apartment. She did have an important role in the story, but she wasn't an adjacent neighbor the way it was depicted in the show. But anyway, you can see that she's constantly calling the police and trying to find out what's happening, and saying, hey, I hear power tools, I hear screams, I hear loud noises, I smell this like horrible odor, and the police just never show up. And they did mention that if you call all the time, how will we know it's an emergency? And I get that if you constantly get calls and they're nothing, then you might not want to investigate it. But I mean, you're the police. It's your fucking job to investigate. Someone's telling you someone is being killed. You should probably look into it. But again, it could be homophobia. It could be that they just don't care about poor people. It could be so many reasons, but they didn't. And she would constantly keep calling, and you can see how fearful she was and how anxious she was. Like, the most disturbing part of that episode for me was when she called the police and saying that someone's being killed, and she's crying, and then I think right after that she's in bed and she can hear power tools, and you can see how scared she is and how frightened she is. She gets out of bed and approaches the vent where she smells all that stuff, and then she hears a saw and like flesh being ripped apart, and she almost like vomits, like not only at the odor but just the sound of flesh being torn apart. She knows that something is wrong, but the police are doing nothing. And I can't even imagine what neighbors must have felt like hearing all these thuds and smelling this, like all these decomposing bodies and whatnot. And it was so chilling and so disturbing, and that episode was by far my favorite. Though I also liked the episode before that that focused on Tony Hughes, and the way they filmed that was amazing, and how they focused so much on someone who's deaf and someone who doesn't have a voice because of that. And the way they would film with only sign language and subtitles, and showing how great of a man this person is, and how he cared about Jeffrey Dahmer, and Jeffrey Dahmer supposedly cared about him. But that's what made him a monster, that despite all these feelings you supposedly have for each other, you still killed him. And like, this show was just really well put together. Like, the way they just kind of dived into everything, why Jeffrey Dahmer was the way he was it the pills, was it the hernia he got when he was really young, was it the finding a roadkill and tearing them apart, like what was it? Like, they just dived into so many different things, and it just tells a story so well despite it not being accurate. And I noticed a lot of things because I've read on Jeffrey Dahmer, I've seen his documentaries, and I saw quite a few things that were not accurate as it was in real life. But this show was just really well put together. But unfortunately, it's met with mixed criticism because a lot of people feel this series was made too soon, in that the victims' families are still alive. And for the victims' families, like, I can't even imagine what it must be like just browsing Netflix one day and then out of nowhere seeing the Jeffrey Dahmer story and having to relive all those memories in your head again. So I don't blame anybody for feeling like it's disrespectful to them and like watching the series. I don't feel that it is, but if someone else felt that way, I mean, I completely understand if you wouldn't want to support the series. But in my personal opinion, it is worth giving it a try. It was fantastic. The acting, the pacing, the details, visual storytelling, everything about the show was just amazing. I mean, the only criticism, or the biggest criticism I have for the show, would be the way it kind of jumps back and forth between time. I was perfectly okay with having the first episode about the final would-be victim, and then moving forward and kind of telling the story, but it jumps back and forth, and that's probably my biggest criticism. But other than that, fantastic show. And honestly, I think they made a wise choice in not being 100% accurate with everything, because the way it was written was entertaining, but the real life details of like Jeffrey Dahmer's story and whatnot are very disturbing. So that's not something that we need to see on television or in a movie or anything. But we did see enough to see that it runs deeper than him just not being normal. But yeah, great series. I recommend it. I don't know if they'll come up with something like this for John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez, or if this is like an exclusive thing for Jeffrey Dahmer. Who knows? But let me know in the comment section what you think of this series. Please hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and I will catch you in the next video. See you then. Bye bye.